Good morning, everybody, and welcome. I think many of us come from countries where the traffic is a lot more dense, so we ended up coming in really early today. So thank you for your patience. We have some online participation as well, so we were waiting for the 10 a.m. mark to start. So my name is Madhavi Pandit. I'm a senior economist with the Economics Research Department at the Asian Development Bank. And I've been communicating with you along with my team, Diane and Mel, as well as the team of Andreas and Cecil. And we're all very excited to see you. We feel like we already know you quite well, your friends, and we hope to keep this collaboration going forward. I would like to start by welcoming our Deputy Regional Director, Su Chin Teoh, to offer the welcome remarks. We're really grateful for the support of the Singapore office in conducting this event. Just a brief introduction of Su Chin. She joined this office in November 2024 and was previously a senior advisor to ADB's Vice President for East and Southeast Asia and the Pacific. She has been very active in the fields of agriculture, environment, and natural resources for most of her career with ADB and organizations such as the International Fund for Agricultural Development. She also played a key role in post-Typhoon Haiyan reconstruction activities, managing the emergency assistance and early recovery grant, as well as the ADB extended mission in the field. It's my pleasure to welcome Su Chin today.
Thank you, Madhavi. Thank you. And you didn't say that I was actually the first person here and I beat the traffic spectacularly. And thank you. It's great to see everyone here. And I'm really happy to see you at this international workshop on gender and disasters. And since I was early, I got to say hello to a few of you. And we're so privileged to have this diverse group of policymakers, researchers, practitioners from across the world. So I also know we have participants on Zoom, and thank you to our virtual participants as well for being here in the room or virtually to share your knowledge and expertise. Together over the next 2 days, we will explore the critical intersections of gender, disaster risk management, and socioeconomic resilience. And as Madhavi mentioned, I had been involved in some post-disaster reconstruction work. So this topic really does hold a very special place in my heart. And I remember when we were working on the post-Haiyan or Yolanda in the Philippines, we call it Yolanda, where we also organized 2 international knowledge sharing fora. And that brought together developing countries, developed countries, just sharing information and sharing the experience. And I will always remember a Philippine senior government official, a secretary, saying that it was just so heartening to feel that they were not alone. Because it's very, very difficult. I remember it was at the 2nd year post-disaster, and in a lot of countries, that's the most difficult because the media starts turning to criticism. Then you've done all the low-hanging fruit. You have to now tackle these difficult issues, housing. You start seeing social issues come up. And he said, just hearing from everyone just made him feel like, and he said, literally, he said, well, at least we feel we're not doing such a bad job. We're not alone. So I think, kudos to the organizers and for teaming up with ISAS and NUS for organizing this event. And it's such a collaborative effort because it's a multidisciplinary topic. And even from ADB, I can look around and see different parts of ADB that have come together to work on this. So there's economic research colleagues, there's the gender team, disaster risk financing. And of course, a big thank you to our co-organizer, the Institute of South Asian Studies at NUS. So thank you, Iqbal and your team, for this wonderful support and hospitality. I've already dug into the snacks, so thank you so much. And besides that, we have 2 other key partners who have made this event possible, and they both provide critical technical assistance funding support. Let me mention the Japan Fund this is a mouthful, for Prosperous and Resilient Asia and the Pacific. And the Japan Fund supports a knowledge technical assistance that implements innovative data and methods to assess the socioeconomic impact of disasters, including gender considerations. And the second partner is the Asia Pacific Climate Finance Fund, ACLIF, which provides funding for innovative, scalable, and commercially viable financial risk management products for mitigating climate change impacts, especially for vulnerable and low-income populations. And I thought it was important to mention these partnerships, not just for the money and the funding angle, but also they bring together our collective experience, expertise, resources, and networks to address this important development issue. This is not new to you, but obviously our region, Asia and the Pacific, is heavily impacted by disasters. If you look over the last 25 years, ADBs, the Asian Development Bank's developing member countries, make up almost half of global disaster deaths, and almost 80% of those affected by disasters worldwide are in our pool of developing member countries. And while disasters affect everyone, the most vulnerable groups, especially women and marginalized communities, face disproportionate risks due to inequalities such as limited access to resources, restricted mobility, and predefined societal roles. So we really need to do more about the gendered nature of disasters, and this workshop is really timely for that. And I was just looking through some of ADB's past reports, and I read, in societies where socioeconomic status of women is low, disasters actually kill more women than men. So this is life and death, both directly and indirectly through related post-disaster events. And I also read another example. So the impact of the 2004 tsunami also highlight the differences in something that we don't really think about, self-rescue ability. Those were determined by learned skills such as swimming and tree climbing. And we all know in many contexts, those are more what boys do and what girls are told actually not to do. So that's just an example from the 2004 tsunami. But on the other hand, that we also know that women can lead resilient strategies that deal with disaster and climate-related shocks and stresses, especially at the local level. So just as we have said, gender roles and relations shape vulnerability to disaster, conversely, they also shape people's capacity to prepare, withstand, and recover. And this is why gender-specific data and research is really critical. So just to share, for those who are not so familiar with what we do, the Asian Development Bank has made significant investments and initiatives focusing on gender-responsive disaster management and resilience. So we have funded projects related to disasters throughout the whole cycle. So risk reduction, preparedness, but also response and recovery. On the gender side, we've raised actually close to $8.5 billion through our gender thematic bond program, which funds projects promoting gender equality and women's empowerment, including projects focused on disaster resilience. ADB has a long-term commitment to gender equality and aims to support programs that tackle the root causes of gender inequality. So a transformative approach to gender equality addresses the structural issues that includes laws, norms, and attitudes that are necessary for sustained change. And in our own long-term strategy, one of the pillars is actually on strengthening women's resilience to external shocks. So that, of course, includes disasters. But despite all these efforts and investments, there's still so much work to be done, as the challenges are multifaceted and really involve so many stakeholders. So over the next 2 days, the workshop will provide a platform to exchange information, ideas, and insights on the linkages between gender and disaster management. And as we move forward, a few steps to think about how we can deepen our collective understanding of the challenges and solutions in integrating gender-focused approaches for disaster management. We also need to recognize, as we've done a few times already this morning, because it's so important, the importance of high-quality, sex-disaggregated data for shaping effective policy. So collecting, interpreting, and disseminating this data in timely manner ensures better decision-making in disaster management and beyond. And we also need to see how we can leverage platforms for collaborations and platforms such as today, this kind of gatherings, to bring together diverse stakeholders from governments, development organizations, academic, the private sector, I think finance and industry, finance and insurance, you will have a session later on. And because everyone plays an essential role in addressing the complex challenges of disaster management. So let me end by thanking you once again, everybody, for your participation, and a special thanks to NUS, to ISAS, for co-organizing this workshop with ADB. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Su Chin. And I think your remarks have set the tone for the event. We are looking forward to a very exciting and multidisciplinary discussion of the topic. But as Su Chin mentioned, we are very grateful to the Institute of South Asia Studies at the National University of Singapore for their generous support. So I would like to invite Iqbal Singh Sevea, Director of the Institute of South Asia Studies, for his remarks. Iqbal is an internationally recognized scholar of contemporary and modern South Asia, whose core research focuses on politics, social and political thought, governance, and Islamic thought. He has held academic appointments in leading institutions globally and is the author of several publications. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madhavi. Ms. Teoh Su Chin, friends, experts, thank you so much for joining us today. I welcome you to the Institute of South Asian Studies. Some of you have already had the pleasure of enjoying some of the snacks. We have more of those coming up later. So if nothing else, we have good food. But I'm delighted this morning to see all of you here and to look around. I see experts, policymakers, practitioners, researchers, think tankers, etc. And I'm particularly delighted that we are going to discuss a topic that's often overlooked, which is the dimensions of disaster risk management and the gender angle in that. And it is heartening that we are going to be focusing in this workshop on three key South Asian countries: Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Nepal. So I'm looking forward to the discussions, and I don't want to preempt any of the discussion, debates, hopefully not violent contestations that will occur the next few days. And so I will restrict myself to some very brief comments to open. And Su Chin, you did a brilliant job in laying out the terrain. So you've done my job for me. Actually, I could just stop now, but formality demands I say something, so I'll say something. So in terms of opening remarks, it's always good to just address the issue of why we are here, right? And I don't mean this in an existential manner of why we are here, but in like physically why we're here for these 2 days. From the topic, gender disaster linkages, it's very clear our focus. But perhaps if you could indulge me in just repeating some of the things that Su Chin has already very rightly pointed out, that disasters, the reason we are here is that disasters don't affect genders equally, right? And that's as clearly as I can state that. And I don't want to restrict the term gender to the binary of women and men, but let me just focus on the category of women for a little while here. And as Su Chin has rightly pointed out, there are numerous studies that have shown that women are affected in different ways and are much more vulnerable to disasters. There are a higher number of women casualties in disasters, and if you just look at cases, one case that comes to mind is the 1991 cyclone in Bangladesh, the cyclone Gorky, in which estimates range from over 80% to over 90% of the casualties were women. Now that's a stark number. And the question that we need to address is why this is the case, right? And there are structural and socio-economic reasons for this, and I'm sure we'll be going into this. But just in terms of some of the broad things that we'll be focusing on, these structural and socio-economic issues range from the economic position of women, the social roles assigned to women, the social roles in which women are defined, but also the social roles in which women are confined as well. And issues of education, issues of preparedness. You mentioned the issue of swimming, tree climbing, etc. These are also matters that are linked to the social roles. And in regard to this, there are 2 points that maybe I could I could just throw out here. One is the intersectionality of these issues, right? Women, the gender issues are intermeshed with the economic position of issues. But in terms of South Asia, and I use South Asia broadly here, there are also issues of caste that sometimes don't get spoken about as well. And so I would like to throw some of this out there. But the other broad issue that I think we should focus on is also about technology. Now, technology is often seen as an enabler, a leveler, etc. But if there's anything we found out of COVID-19 pandemic, is that technology is not necessarily a leveler. In cases across South Asia, we found that in poorer families, preferences to allow or enable the boys in the family to have access to technology so that they could have education, deprive girls of education in certain parts. So I think even the technology aspect of it, we should destabilize and problematize a bit. The other broad issue that I'm sure we'll be going into is that it's not just about the disasters itself, but it's about post-disaster management structures as well. And here again, if we use the category of women, we find women get far more responsibilities thrown at their way, be it fetching water, caring, etc. But it's also the issue of the position of women and safety of women in shelter homes that come up. So it's not just the disaster, but also the post-disaster situations that I'm sure we'll be looking at. And as Su Chin has already highlighted, these various issues underscore the need to integrate gender perspectives into research on disasters. This will entail, again, I'm repeating what Su Chin already mentioned, the conduct of disaggregated data. And here again, if I can just indulge myself to say that in the age of, again, coming back to technology, in the age of AI, where data modeling, data analysis, etc., is much more contingent and reliant on technology, we are confronted by a new dimension of how to deal with gender in that sense. So I think this is something that we should also bear in mind as we think about disaster risk management initiatives as well. Now, apart from data, the collection of data, we need to grapple with how data is used in decision making. And beyond this, how mechanisms and systems that include people of different genders need to be developed. In other words, disaster risk management initiatives that are actively gender inclusive must be funded, designed, and developed. And I think these are the key questions that we'll be dealing with. Yeah. I just want to highlight some of the broad points that we'll be engaging with over the next few days, and I'm heartened that there'll be three key themes that we're looking at. The first is progress in gender integration in DRM frameworks, and here, among other issues, we'll be engaging with how far have we come in mainstreaming gender considerations in policy and practice. Second broad theme will be innovative data solutions and risk impact analysis. Here again, one of the issues we'll be grappling with is how can technology enhance our understanding of gender disaster linkages. And the third broad theme is finance and insurance solutions. What mechanisms can help build financial resilience for the most affected groups? And I'm privileged and honored that we have a distinguished lineup of speakers and participants whose expertise will contribute to productive discussions and actionable recommendations. This workshop aims to, of course, foster an exchange of ideas, but I think the other aspect of this workshop is to foster collaborations that can lead to hopefully real world change and inspire new research and partnerships. And in this aspect, I'm delighted that ISAS is partnering with ADB. ADB, of course, has a core strength in dealing with not only disaster management and risk management issues, but also gender initiatives as well. And on our part, we are an institute that has focused extensively on contemporary South Asia, and we study issues such as socioeconomic issues, but also environmental challenges confronting South Asia. So I think it's a partnership that's here, hopefully, and I'll just put myself out there and say, hopefully it's a partnership that we will continue to build upon, and we look to taking this in new directions in the coming months and years ahead. And I'll close by just saying that as we head into our discussions over the next few days, I hope we get to engage with the issues, but I also hope that we challenge some of the existing narratives and propose innovative solutions. And with that, I thank you all again for joining us. And like all of you, I'm looking forward to the discussions over the next few days. Thank you very much.
Okay, so today we are very excited to start the plenary session on the Sendai Gender Action Plan. We have two presenters who will talk a little bit about the overview of this plan and some of the implementation arrangements. After which, this will be followed by a panel discussion on various aspects and strategies, as well as implementation arrangements, as well as challenges and gaps, etc. So to make the presentation, I would like to invite Athena, Denise, Galao, and Mary Picard. Athena is a seasoned development practitioner with 15 years of experience in humanitarian action, disaster risk management, and climate change adaptation. Currently, she co-leads Empower, Women for Climate Resilient Societies program, a joint initiative by UN Women and the UN Environmental Program. This aims to accelerate gender-responsive and human rights-based climate and DRR actions across Asia and the Pacific, catalyzing partnerships that bridge various stakeholders to build resilience with a focus on women and those most on risk. Our second speaker is, co-presenter is Mary Picard. Mary is an Australian lawyer who has worked internationally in disaster risk management law and policy since 2006. Over the last decade, she has focused on integrating gender equality into law, policy, and action in disaster risk reduction and climate change, working with various institutions. In 23-24, she was the UN Office of Disaster Risk Reduction, UNDRR's, lead for developing and drafting the Gender Action Plan to support implementation of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, also called Sendai GAP, in collaboration with UN Women and UNFPA. And she's currently working with UNDRR supporting its implementation. So I will hand over to Athena and Mary for the presentation.
This one, right? This one. It's very weird for me to be sitting down with a microphone. Maybe I can just hold this, no? Because it's kind of weird. So hi, good morning. I'm Athena again. So within UN Women, I work under the resilience team. The resilience team covers humanitarian, DRR, and climate altogether. My day job is working on climate. So excuse me if I'm a bit rusty on the DRR concepts, but traditionally, like historically, I was a young DRR practitioner back in the Philippines. So Su Chin, when you were mentioning Haiyan, I was there in Haiyan in Ground Zero. So that was one of the key things where we really saw that like the response side is critical, but the planning, preparedness, mitigating side is equally important. So having said that, let me just walk you through the gap, which is I have been tasked to do. So the gap is, so again, I guess always the question, I guess we don't have to begin why we're here. And because Su Chin, Iqbal also walked us through all the reasons why we have to do gender in DRR and why gender is critical for us to achieve our DRR actions. But why a gender action plan? So some of the context Su Chin and Iqbal has walked us through in terms of the digital divide, and technology's been there, but it's not reaching the people, it's not changing their lives, it's not making them more adaptable to the climate crisis or the disasters that they face. Number two is the lack of data. And I know a lot of the governments here, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka has done some work on gender data. The academic institutions has also done. It's just that data is quite disparate, and it's not informing how we make our decisions on DRR. New development, of course, is the early warning for all initiative when they have emphasized that we cannot do technical solutions anymore, that we really have to ground those solutions to impact the lives of those on the ground. And the last, of course, is funding gap. A lot of the research around financing women is done through OECD and through a climate lens, I would say. So OECD came up with a number, only 0.01% of all climate finance target report gender as a primary objective. And sadly, only 3% of that actually goes to women's rights organizations, who are at the forefront of all the work that's happening. So having said that, so we know the context. We know what the problem is. So, but why the gap? So the gap is not anything new. So that's the first thing maybe I would say. So the gap, as much as the gender work has been maybe devised, and a lot of us are gender people in the room. It's really an iterative process. So a lot of the things that you will see in the gap, which I will walk you through, is actually through years and years and years of practice from different parts of the world, from grassroots to the national government agencies. So the gap tries to pull them together and see what actually works and how do we scale it and really replicate in different places. So the gap, of course, is aligned with the priorities under the Sendai. It's supposed to really fast track, accelerate all the commitments under the Sendai. What the gap fills in, because the Sendai has very strong language in terms of social inclusion and gender, but what gap it fills is because the language is broad, we don't know what it actually means. So the gap clarifies the how. So the Sendai has the why and the commitment, but the gap is the how. And this is the goals of the gap, of course, substantially increasing resource allocations, activities, and impacts of gender-responsive DRR, and substantially decreasing gender-related disaster risk by 2030. So this is the gap. Question first, how many people have seen the gap? Okay, so maybe like 20% of people in the room. Yes, thank you, sir. Okay, so the gap it's fairly recent. So it's launched in 2024 during the Commission of the Status of Women. The Commission of Status of Women is basically what is it? It's like, who knows climate COP? Yes, climate COP, So it's basically similar to climate COP, but in CSW, or Commission of Status of Women, we deliberate a lot of the issues around gender. So COP is for climate, CSW is for gender. So during CSW 66, that's 3 years ago, it's the first time that disaster reduction and climate change was discussed as a critical issue, the critical issue that includes gender. So that's 2022, I think, when we did that. One of the key outcomes of the agreed conclusions in CSW 66 was that there has to be a gender action plan that focuses in implementation. And then there's several things that happened along the way. The global platform on DRR said in their high-level notes that, we really need something around gender, and there has to be a plan. And then the midterm review happened, and then it galvanized that commitment, because what the midterm review also saw is that a lot of the governments across the world have been prioritizing gender. But the question is, how do we actually implement them? So the gap is a result of several consultations around 65 countries, and you will see the data in the gap also, like 65 countries, 500 different stakeholders, civil society, governments, academia, all putting their brains together into this one document. So what does it look like? And you will see, I know it's so tiny, but maybe I can point to you some of the key things. So of course, the gap is basically divided into a couple of sections. So there's 5 parts to it. The first part looks at the preamble. So it's the why are we doing all of these things. The second is some of the key goals and objectives. That's the what. And that links to all the key priorities under the Sendai. Part 3 is really defining who are the key actors. What are the role of the governments, the civil society, private sector? It looks at national level actors, international actors, and also global actors that has to have an interplay to be able to implement it. The fourth part is looking at the how. So the fourth part, of course, is the most critical part. I mean, all of them are critical, but the fourth part, I think, is somehow so the fourth part is actually the means of implementation. So it's the how, but the fifth part, which is my favorite part, actually, because I work with so many NDMOs before, and then they keep asking us on concrete, specific activities that they can do with the resources that they have. So the fifth part, which is the actions, there's 33 actions to the Sendai Gap. It also gives you, apart from the 33 actions, there's actually concrete recommendations on examples. So this is how it currently spread like. So there's 4 Sendai priorities, 9 key objectives under the gap, and there's 33 actions. Today, I'll walk you through some of all of the objectives and only some of the actions, because we don't have time to look at 33 actions and X amount of activities. But let me start with my favorite. Actually, so my favorite is, because I come from a long time, risk assessment, community-based, participatory CVAs. So disaster risk analysis is one, understanding disaster risk is one of the critical pieces of work, as we know, that it defines what we do next, because the risk assessments are basically what is like what decisions we base all it's the basis of all our decisions moving forward. So the two key objectives under priority number 1 looks at the increased availability of sex, age, income, and disability disaggregated data. And the second one is really looking at the use of gender analysis. So now that we have data, what do we do with it? The new feature, I would say, in terms of the gender gap somehow, because is that it's framing that there has to be some intersectional lens when we do the gender analysis. I mean, we have, so for those who have done the gender analysis before, it has always been intersectional, but now it has a bit of emphasis on that intersectionality perspective. And that also brings us maybe also, I do have notes because I might forget things. And then, so key objective 1 actually looks at both the collection and the use of gender data. So some of the key actions that is there is increased reporting. So you see here, so this is the key objective, and these are the key actions. So increased reporting of sex, age, income, disability disaggregated data in the Sendai Framework Monitor. Only a few countries currently do that. Some have done it for targets A and B, but that's one of the key. And then there's also assess current methods and challenges. As an example, this is what you can do. Assess current methods and challenges for collecting, processing, and storing, analyzing, and sharing local population data. A lot of also the advice related to Action 2 is looking at how we can really bring, for instance, national statistics offices and the NDMOs and the gender machinery to really work together in producing and using the data itself. So key objective 2, of course, looks at gender analysis as integral into risk assessments. For those who have done a lot of the participatory risk assessments in the olden days when technology wasn't there yet, I think it's really a new feature where you integrate now a gender lens across the different tools that we have present. And then I guess we picked this because, of course, we are in the presence of academe. So we also see very much the what do you call this? The value add of making sure that we do have research backing us up in terms of the gender differences, in terms of how position and condition influences capacities and vulnerabilities. So your role is definitely one of the most important. And then we have the second one, which is looking at risk governance. So risk governance, there's also 2 key objectives. The first key objective is looking at how we mainstream gender across the DRM policies, but not just mainstreaming gender in terms of the policy and the language, but making sure that there is actual institutional mechanisms in place. There's also budgets connected to those commitments that are outlined under the DRM plans. The second part, of course, is where we always work as UN Women, is making sure we have increased meaningful participation of women and the most at-risk groups in risk governance. So some of the examples, again, is looking at gender-responsive budgeting. And I know, Nepal, you've been doing GRB, and also Bangladesh has been very strong on GRB practices. Some of the examples is looking at the percentage of total risk reduction related to budget to gender-responsive solutions. In APM CDR, I think because I'm Filipino, so some of the key examples was that the GAD budget, the Gender and Development Budget in the Philippines, requires all agencies, including NDRMOs, to make sure that 5% is allocated to gender. So some practices similar to that. And I think this is also a reference because I also work on the climate space. So gender tagging and climate tagging is now a big thing. So this is also building off of what exists in other spaces. So gender tagging in terms of finance. In terms of key objective 4, one new key feature I would say in terms of the gap is in relation to putting quotas. So there are some activities under the gap that says that in terms of delegation, there has to be quotas, there has to be parity of people attending regional spaces. But apart from that, we're also looking at really creating those spaces for engagement and really investing in women's groups or women's organizations to also be in global and regional platforms, so we can actually hear what's happening on the ground. And then we have, I know, do I speak fast? And I apologize. This is how I usually speak, but let me know and you can ask questions later. So this is the third priority, which is investing. And Mary and I were discussing earlier, we're like, And I was also looking at all the UN Women things that we've been doing in DRR. And I think this is really the tricky part because the financing part, and Ramona, I see you nod. Ramona's been working on gender DRR for a long time too. So there's two things. Number 5 is looking at mainstreaming gender into all investment decisions around DRR. And key objectives 6 is looking at how do we improve access to financing. If the problem is that women's groups is not able to access them, or people at the grassroots level is not able to access or define how money is being used, then that is definitely something that we have to solve immediately. So looking at the first one, some of the key actions under this is looking also, so for those who work on climate, we also have different vertical funds, right? Like we have GCF, the Global Climate Fund, Green Climate Fund, we have GEF, we have Adaptation Fund. One of the key criteria in all grant proposals or all proposals submitted there is that we have to make sure that there is a gender assessment that's happened and there's also a gender action plan that accompanies it. And that also forms part of the decision making whether investments are to be made. So similarly, that's something that we would want to see in disaster risk reduction. So all investments should also have a gender criteria in terms of making decisions. And that requires us talking to different donors and also looking at governments to how you can frame some of those decision making around your resources. Key objective 6, of course, looks at increasing accessibility of funding and financing. And that means that we have to look at other innovative financing mechanisms to be able to do that. So tomorrow, I think we'll be able to hear some of microinsurance. There's a couple of finance sessions tomorrow, so we'll be able to look at some of those models. But really, we have to augment whatever exists currently. And also, the big discussions that are happening is really how do we leverage now private sector investments in terms of funding women's work on the ground. Last one is looking at the priority 4. So now we go and look at the response, build back better, and reconstruction part. So the first one, so there's 3 of them. The first one is looking at end-to-end multi-hazard that has to be gender responsive, as well as AA actions, anticipatory actions also has to be gender responsive. The second one looks at like the build back better. We shouldn't be doing, after recovery, we shouldn't be doing the same things because we're not supposed to replicate the same inequalities that exist. And the last one is looking at, and I think the last one, to be honest, is one of the most groundbreaking one in terms of the gender gap because it gives, so protection, gender-based violence work, and also SRHR work used to be in the field of humanitarian. But now that you put it in the Sendai gap, it requires you to also now think what you have to do beforehand to make sure that the services on GBV and SRHR continues to is continued regardless of crises. So, and here are some of the actions. I saw 5 minutes, so I have to hand it over now to Mary. But if you do have questions on the gap, we're gonna talk. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Athena. That was really interesting for me, and I was one of the drafters of the GAP, and so it's really nice to have that fresh perspective. So thank you very much. I'm just going to speak briefly about the I guess the administrative aspects of it in a way, talking about the reporting of on the Sendai gap. So one of the big discussions during the consultations for the Sendai gap was everyone was saying, oh, another burden of reporting. We don't want any more reporting. And we could hear that very strongly. But another aspect of it was that we didn't want to set up another whole system about gender in DRR, because what the whole purpose of the Sendai gap is to integrate gender equality into existing disaster risk management. So the reporting uses existing systems. So for the UN system itself, and I will mention here also that the UN system has a new system-wide action plan on gender equality, which is requiring UN agencies to spend 15% of their total project funding on gender equality. So that's another thing that's going to be really important in terms of the UN system. But they already have the UN Plan of Action on Disaster Risk Reduction for Resilience. And so the UN agencies are already reporting through that, and they will report on their Sendai Gap activities through that process. So that's the internal United Nations process of reporting on their activities on disaster risk reduction. So that won't change. It's just supplemented by some goals from the UN, from the Sendai Gap. And then for governments, most of what we're talking about here can be reported through the Sendai Framework Monitor. So for those of you who are not familiar with that, it's the database run by UNDRR, which countries report to on their progress under the targets of the Sendai Framework. And in that, countries can add voluntary indicators. So what we're doing at the moment is developing some tools for countries to use for self-assessment to be able to do that reporting. There's already mechanisms for countries to report basic gender, sex disaggregated data on targets A and B of the Sendai framework. So there's a lot of encouragement to do that and to continue to enhance that through custom indicators. So we're developing those. So for non-governmental stakeholders, there is already the existing Sendai Framework Voluntary Commitment Platform. So that is where civil society and other non-government organisations can develop their own priorities and programs that align with the Sendai Gap and put those commitments on that platform and then report through that platform on the outcomes. And then finally, we are in the process of developing and piloting some indicators. So there's two sorts of indicators. There's some global ones which are designed to give an overview of progress by 2030. They, and in some cases, we'll be using proxies and using information that's already there and can be easily accessed. So one of them is the countries reporting this data in the Sendai Framework Monitor or in their own national database systems, which hopefully would translate into reporting in the Sendai Framework Monitor, and countries with national DRR strategies that align with the Sendai Gap. So there's already a tool within the Sendai Framework Monitor to report alignment with the Sendai framework, and so we're developing another one to be able to do self-assessments to report alignment with the Sendai Gap as well. So I'll just switch to the right-hand side of that slide on the checklist tools for governments, because really this Gender Action Plan is all about implementation at country level by governments and by civil society. And so we're in the process of we have a draft set of a checklist tool for governments and for civil society at country level. And so that's really designed to think through what are the implications at country level for the Sendai Gap objectives and what are the actions that can be taken in each country that are achievable in the short, medium and long term. And remember, we're thinking at the moment the horizon is 2030, but obviously we're thinking longer term than that. So we're actually piloting this tool and beginning with a 2-day workshops in Fiji next week. Kiribati has also expressed interest in piloting it. So this piloting is a process of going through how you would answer the questions, but also what you think of the tool and how that should change. So that can then be launched at the global platform in Geneva in June of this year. So we're also interested in other governments and organisations who are interested in piloting that. So if anyone is, please talk to me during this workshop. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary and Athena. We will get into the panel discussion and then we can do question answers all together. So to explore the implementation of gender responsive disaster risk management in developing economies like Bangladesh, Nepal, and Sri Lanka, we will now invite our panelists and moderator Zonibel Woods. Zonibel will be the one to introduce our panelists, so let me take the opportunity to introduce Zonibel. Zonibel is the Senior Social Development Specialist at the ADB. She's an expert in gender mainstreaming, policy development, and capacity building. with leadership experience in civil society organizations like the International Women's Health Coalition and the Ford Foundation, and has been with ADB since 2012. So I invite Zoni to start the panel session by inviting our panelists as well. They will join you here.
Morning, everyone. It's really nice to see all the names and faces in this room because we've been, preparing for this meeting for a while, which we unfortunately had to reschedule. But it's great to be here in Singapore, and thank you to NUS for hosting us. So my job here is actually a fantastic job because I get to talk to 4 really interesting panelists about the work that they're doing. So if I can invite Mr. Razwanur Rahman, Director General of the Department of Disasters Management in Bangladesh, to come up, please, and bring your your little name tags so everyone knows who the different panelists are. And then we have Mayor General Udaya Herath as well. Please come up. And we have Anil Pokhrel, who's the Senior Advisor for Plan 8, Risk Consulting Nepal, and Sonia Akhtar, who's a Senior Lecturer, Crawford School of Public Policy. So if I could just say a few words to introduce each one of our speakers. Mr. Rahman is the Additional Secretary to the Government of Bangladesh and is currently working as the Director General in the Department of Disaster Management under the Ministry of Disaster Management and Relief. As the Director General, he supervises and monitors all of the activities. And before joining here, he served in the Ministry of Commerce, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, and Ministry of Power, Energy, and Mineral Resources. He also has vast experience working in the field of administration and was associated with rescue and rehabilitation of flood and cyclone affected people in different parts of Bangladesh. So welcome, Mr. Rahman. Then we have Mayor General Udaya Herath, and he is currently the Director General of Disaster Management Center in Sri Lanka. He has completed his Master of Science on Management Studies and with a first-class merit pass in 2020 at Osmania University in India. He's a retired Army officer who has 34 years of dedicated, extensive experience in challenging environments, and he has a track record in strategic planning, decision-making, and effective problem-solving, which has led to numerous successes in his career, including for key peacekeeping missions in the UN. Then next we have Mr. Anil Pokhrel, who is a senior advisor at Planet 8 risk consulting firm based in Kathmandu. In December 2024, he completed a 5-year term as a chief executive of the government of Nepal National Disaster Reduction and Management Authority, and he has played a critical role in establishing NDRRMA as Nepal's apex institution for disaster risk management. Finally, we have Sonia Akhtar, who's a senior lecturer and an associate professor at the Crawford School of Public Policy with the Australian National University. And we have been in contact, I think maybe 3 years, Sonia, or something like that, and along with Madhavi, and we have just all finally met today. So it's really great to finally see each other in person after collaborating over so many years. She has earned her PhD in Environmental Management and Development from the Australian National University in 2010 and holds a master's degree in economics from York University in Toronto, Canada. Prior to joining the Crawford School, she was an assistant professor at Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy and NUS Singapore from 2015 to 2022. And she has also held positions as a scientist in the International Rice Institute from 2014 to 2015. So I will stop there. All of our speakers have also so many other things they have that we could speak to that they have done in their lives. But I encourage you to during the break speak to all of them, each one of them, about their work, because they all have really fascinating careers. So I will start with the Director General Herath. Now, the Sri Lanka National Disaster Management Plan from 2020 to 2030 mainstreams gender responsive disaster risk management. So what ways have you found to support the implementation of the gender equality priorities in the plan? We heard this morning that we may have plans, but some of the challenges are around financing, implementation, and so on. So if you could share with us some ways in which you have been able to implement the gender responsive nature of your plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Deputy Regional Director, Asian Development Bank, Singapore office, Director, Institute of Social Asia Studies, and my panelists, and all the academias, practitioners, and all the officials, and all the stakeholders who take part for this gender and disaster workshop. Good morning. So on behalf of Government of Sri Lanka, as a Director General Disaster Management Center, I would like to congratulate and convey our compliments for the work done by Asian Development Bank and the South Asian Studies National Institute, National University of Singapore. So, as per the Sri Lankan perspective, so if I give us some kind of a preamble prior to getting into the subject matter, 2004 give us 2004 tsunami give us a pivotal kind of a situation to plan for the disaster management in Sri Lanka. So when Parliament Select Committee established, and then 2005 Parliament Act 13 enacted, and that's the birth of the Sri Lankan Disaster Management Center. So we have National Council, that is the apex body, which headed by the HE, the President. Then Prime Minister is deputy. Then we have official leader with 5 official oppositions parliamentary members, 17 line ministries, and chief ministers of 9 provincials. That's the structure of the Sri Lanka Disaster Management Council. So then we operate in 3 tiers, like national, then subnational, and local level. So national level, as I mentioned, all the line ministries, and then subnational level, all the districts and provincials, basically government agents, will interact with the respective stakeholders within the district to mitigate awareness, preventions, and response within the cycle of disasters. So here, National Plan 23 and 24, we have in line with the 4 SFDRR framework, mainly like as I understand the risk, then governance, then investment, then build back better kind of a thing. So here we have 153 actions in line with SFDRR. And I given the responsibility towards each line ministries, all the public-private partners, as well as other local authorities. They are leading agents who play the leading role, then supportive roles, and mid-term, long-term, and short-term plans were actions were given, and those the desired outcomes are the attaining SDG, Sustainable Development Goals. So, as I mentioned, Sri Lanka gender plays a significant role in disaster risk reduction with women. Generally, they are experiencing greater vulnerability to, especially on natural disasters. Because very recently, I do have experience when when Fenagal cyclone hit the northern part, especially northern and eastern part of the Sri Lanka, how these women and children were vulnerable to that kind of catastrophic kind of event. So national strategies directly address the highlighting following factors, identify enabling environment for gender mainstreaming as a cross-cutting areas, then recognize the difference prevalent among men and women when it's come to the disaster risk and vulnerability. So here, the women have experienced economic abuse by a partner in their lifetime, especially on this kind of situation. And even meantime, especially some partners taking their hard-earning money, this kind of a situation. So that's why I'm telling, so we have to have some kind of a empowerment, especially on a business continuity kind of micro level, kind of a business continuity plan for the women to empower her to run the family during, especially on this kind of a situation. So for that, we have a way forward support implementing the gender equality, while understand the risk when we prepared our disaster risk index, because as per the Disaster Management Act, we identified 21 disasters. So we have two mandates, mainly National Disaster Management Plan 23 to 30, as well as National Emergency Operation Plan. It's called, that's the regulatory framework or the operational framework of the response part. So here, the food security and livelihood recovery emergency assistance projects, training and implementation of assistance programs for low-income women. It is implemented by especially Asian Development Bank for the year 22-24. For this endeavor, Ministry of Defense as the subject Ministry of Disaster Management, together with the National Committee on Women, National Bureau of Women and the Ministry of Women, Child and Social Protection have launched a number of initiatives to reduce the vulnerability of women and to address the gender requirement in disaster management. Women Rights Project, it was United Nations Population Fund with their initiative. Yeah. Then, due to time's constraint, there are some projects like food security and livelihood recovery emergency resistance project, training and implementation of assistance program and low-income women. It is also implemented by Asian Development Bank. So when implementing of this gender equality 23 to 30, so we have strategies on national level as well as local level, because we have to empower the women on, especially on the to live with the risk kind of a strategy, because you can't get away with the disasters. You have to live with the risk. So the resilience is so vital for this kind of situation. So here, gender mainstreaming in national policies, relevant laws, plans and budget related to disaster risk management. And here, special emphasis has to be made during disaster situation to do a safety center audit, kind of safety audit, because it's so vital, because when the women are more vulnerable during their stay at safety center. So safety audit has to be done. So thank you very much. We'll have round 2 also. Then I give my real experience on the ground situations, because you can develop different concepts, but implementation on the ground is the matter. So with that, thank you, Chair, for giving me the opportunity to give us some kind of overview of the National Disaster Management 2330 plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, General Herath. I think that gives us a very good idea of sort of the areas that you're focusing on. And as you mentioned, we will have a second question for you as well before opening it up to the participants here and those online. So now if we can turn to Director General Rahman. You know, the law and policy framework mainstreams gender responsive DRM in Bangladesh. What are some ways that you're currently translating the gender priorities into planning and implementation?
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning to everybody. I'm very delighted to be here, and I convey my thanks to ADB and South Asian Studies of National University of Singapore. You know, Bangladesh is a densely populated country. 1,350 people live in per square kilometer, and it is also a disaster-prone country. Every year we face number of disasters, sometimes flood, cyclone, sometimes flash flood, drought, heat wave, and others. In 1970, a cyclone attacked in the southern parts of Bangladesh, and there almost 1 million people lost their lives. But nowadays, in 2023 and 2024, in 2023, the cyclone Mocha that attacked Bangladesh, and 2024, the cyclone Remal. In 2023, there was no news of death, and in 2024, only certainly more than 10 people lost their lives. So Bangladesh is trying hard to face all these disasters. Now, I'm going to tell you what are our policy interventions regarding gender in disaster-related issues. We have Disaster Management Act 2012. Under this act, my organization, Department of Disaster Management, has been established. In this act, it is stated that the government should take proper steps for rehabilitation and risk reduction of affected people, especially ultra poor and marginal ones, namely women, elderly people, physically challenged people. We have another document that is National Disaster Management Policy. In fact, it is the elaboration of the act, and it reaffirms our commitment towards gender-related issues. The third one is Standing Order and Disaster. This is a very important document for us. This SOD was first introduced in 1997 and then revised twice, 2010 and 2019. As my friend from Sri Lanka said, they have committees in the national level and committees in the provincial and other levels. In our SOD, it is clearly mentioned that before, during, and after disaster, what is the role of the different ministries, different departments, and our administrative units. We have administrative units in division, in district, in sub-district, and in union level. In the central level, the committee is headed by Prime Minister. And in all the committees, in the divisional level, district, sub-district, union, even union is the lowest tier of local government representation in Bangladesh. We have other local government bodies that is in the city corporation and in the municipalities. In all these bodies, there are disaster management committees, and there are women representatives. They have posts in all these committees, and we have elected representatives in the union level. 3, we have in the union level, we have 13 elected representatives. 1 is called the head, the chairman, and we have 9 members from 9 wards and 3 female members for the covering the 9 wards. So in the union level, these female representatives, sometimes they work as chairperson. And in all the committees, there is also representation of women bodies who are working for gender. And now come to our national plan for disaster management. It is a 5-year plan. In this plan, it has been stated that we have to employ volunteers to face different types of disasters. And number of female volunteers must be equal to male. It is a very important point, remember. And we have also stated that those who will work as volunteer, they must work to prevent any sort of violence towards women during disaster. Another point is they will have to take special efforts for rescue of pregnant and elderly women during rescue operation. Bangladesh has built number of cyclone shelters. These are, we call flood shelters, cyclone shelters, and we have other names also. We have constructed more than 950 cyclone shelters, but I'll elaborate this point in my next slide. We have national volunteer policy. Under this policy, we can employ 6 groups of volunteers. They are youth volunteers aging from 18 to 50, elderly people, they can work as volunteers from the age level 51 to 65. Then we have community-based volunteers, professional volunteers, and in all these cases, we encourage participation of women, physically challenged people. Then Bangladesh Climate Change and Strategy Action Plan and the other 2 documents. In all documents, we have said that we have to take special measures for increasing resilience of women by livelihood diversification, by making more community-based adaptations and social safety net measures. Now, what are we doing in the ground level? We have employment generation program for the poor, and it is it works twice in a year, 40 days every time. And here 33% beneficiaries must be female. If a female participate in a whole 80 days, she will earn $160. That is one sort of empowerment for her. We have another EGPP Plus program. You know, 1.2 million Rohingyas have been living in Bangladesh for a long time. So they stay in Cox's Bazar. There we have another EGPP Plus program for the host level communities, and this program is funded by World Bank. We have cyclone preparedness program in 19 coastal districts, and there we have 78,000 volunteers, and 50% are female. And one thing I want to share with you that a couple of years back, Bangladesh achieved United Nations Civil Service Award for Women Empowerment. One of the reasons of this CPP program, because there are 50% women. And we have recruited volunteers to fight against disaster in urban areas when we found fire and other disasters. Then our fire service department work with them. We have trained 48,000 and 1/3 are female. Then, as I have said, we have more than 950 shelters. Nowadays, these shelters are to a great extent are gender friendly. If you visit any of the flood shelters in Bangladesh, it is 3-story building and one floor is totally dedicated for female. They have special washroom, they have other facilities. And there are ramp in some cases up to ground level, in some cases up to first floor level. And there are special washroom and other facilities for physically challenged people. In these shelters, if you go to the roof, you will find a separate room for cooking so that women who are staying here, they can cook with their own. Every year we build number of bridge culvert. In this year, we are implementing 4,000 small bridge culvert ranging up to 15 meters. And we build other roads in our areas. And we also procure different types of equipment like ladder for fire service department. For our volunteers, we provide them megaphone, vest, boot, and others so that they can work with comfort. As I have seen, this is the picture in the upper left. These shelters, there are places for the cattle. They have safe places. And you see in the lower part that women and children, they are in the shelter. And in the right side of the lower part, we have built 0.2 million houses for our disaster-prone people. But we have to go a long way. The first thing is when any disaster occurs, we get report every day about how many people have taken shelter in the shelter homes, how many have died. There are separation regarding men and women, but we do not get data instantly that if a school is closed, how many male or female students are affecting, how many female students have stopped attending the schools. We need to increase our accuracy and the information regarding data. And many of the ministries, many of the organizations are working with gender, but we need more harmony because as I have said, in the lowest tower of local government, in the union portion, in the sub-district, there are female representatives, but we need more participation from them as well as the ministry which is controlling them. And women, they're quite weak in using technology. We have interactive voice responses. It says, how is the weather today? What is the news for the fishermen who are going to the ocean and others? But women cannot use it like the men. And there are sometimes cultural barriers. And we have gender responsive budget, but we need to implement in a large scale. And we need more research regarding this gender. Thank you all.
Thank you, Director General Rahman. I think it was really useful to hear about the things that you have been able to implement, but also, your challenges that remain. I think it's important for us to have this continuous sort of feedback loop and examining sort of where we still have to go. So that was very helpful. So now we have Mr. Anil Pokhrel from Nepal. So as the head of the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Agency in Nepal last year, so this is a little bit of your former life. You oversaw the development of the new strategic action plan for gender equality, disability, and social inclusion in disaster risk reduction and management 2024. So what were the main things in the plan that they hope to achieve, and within what time frame? Over to you, Anil.
Thank you, Johnny Bill, for having me and for this wonderful question. But first and foremost, I really want to thank the ADB team and the NUS team for hosting this very important event and putting a spotlight on these three countries, mountain countries where Nepal is one of those, but also a deltic environment, world's one of the most densely populated country, and an island nation. I think if we're able to kind of really get these gender and disaster strategies worked out in these three countries, I think we have a very promising case to really scale it up across Asia and the Pacific. I really want to congratulate ADB and NUS for really organizing this. Nepal's story is not completely different to what Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, our colleagues, have just mentioned. What we've done is, again, it's been more than 65 days ever since I've completed my term. But what we did was it took nearly 2 years for us to come up with this National Strategy Action Plan for JETSI, mainly in integrating disaster risk reduction and management. To keep it simple, I'll call it as a Nepal's gap. Following Athena's work. Athena has really made my life easy as well through her presentation, and so has Mary done it. So what we've done is basically in almost for 2 years, we really again had series of consultations across the country. Nearly 600 people consulted fairly widely. A lot of consultations across 4 levels of governance at the national level, but also at the provincial, district, and hotspot locations. We went and had interactions with local governments, with NGOs, social civil society organizations, and academic institutions. Worked closely with UN Women, UNICEF, and others. World Bank had been a partner to this as well. So this was through a long process that we come up with this national strategy, which was then endorsed through an executive order, similar to, again, Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. We also have a national council and an executive committee. So it had to undergo 3 rounds of deliberations. There are a lot of questions and drilling to me as a member secretary. And then we got this endorsed back in 2024, March. I'll stand up. And so if you really look into these 2 documents, this is the Nepal Sendai framework, if I may make it simple. So this wasn't enough, as Athena has mentioned, and so it was diluted. So this is where we then had to come up with this strategic action plan for JETSI in disaster risk and management. I brought copies, around 20 copies of it. It's in English. We got it translated right during the APMC DRR days. So we'd be happy to kind of share you a copy. So similar to, again, the Sendai strategy and the gap report. So these are 2 documents that I really want to mention it. So the challenges that we went through is basically, again, most of the work had been focused on humanitarian response. There's quite a body of knowledge and experience within Nepal to especially integrate disaster, the needs of gender, personal disability, especially in the humanitarian context. But when it comes to understanding risk, and rightly mentioned by Mr. Singh early during the opening of the workshop, how do you really get those disaster data, and how is it used for risk assessment, risk information, and risk communications? There's an absolute silence on that. So and we also had a good body of knowledge, especially in integrating JETSI considerations into reconstruction and recovery. We've reconstructed around 800,000 houses following the 2015 earthquake. So these are actually all compiled into this in the form of a strategy. And so while preparing for this, again, we really had a strong focus on again, consultations led by women, and particularly persons with disabilities. That was throughout all the provinces in these consultations. The biggest challenge for us, again, how do you not only come up with a plan, but how do you actually, again, make it implementable? How do you localize it? And so similar to the gap, our framework was very much into looking into the 4 strategic pillars. So that's how we started kind of dissecting the needs for JETSI. We have, similar to, again, the gap, we have, to be exact, 5 objectives, 8 strategies, and 46 strategic activities outlined in it. What was really interesting for us is, again, we were working on a different planet where you and Newman and you all were working on a different planet. We actually happened to really come to a conclusion together. We got the draft version, a final draft version, just a week before it was released, and so that's where it did help Nepal's gap to do a last bit of kind of final iterations. So especially on monitoring, thanks Mary for bringing that up. Monitoring and reporting, that's now strongly reflected into the gap. We have, again, committees being set aside across all 4 levels of governance. So this is how we, at the last minute, we were informed by the gap work as well. And so it really marks a significant shift from a JETSI focus to also look into considerations of persons with disabilities as well. Focuses on other strategic priorities, early warning systems. Intersectionality has been really kind of brought up very strongly. And And so I just want to again focus on again what are we doing now again, especially after having this national strategy, is again localizing it across again the national level into multiple ministries, but also at the provinces and the local governments. One of examples is what I want to say is how do we kind of really localizing risk information, especially that considers again gender, sex, disabilities, even elderly, and the need for language. We're a country of 100+ language speaking nation. So our kind of risk information platforms are organized at a national level where every 4 levels of governments contribute to that whole process. The National Disaster Risk Management Authority curates that. And so, but the data entry is actually done by the local governments with support from civil society actors, academic institutions, and NGOs. So this is one of such municipalities where you see a landslide risk information. Usually it only used to be hazard information in the past. And so now the difference that we've been able to do is, so we've been able to overlay this with houses, with schools, disaggregate it down to a household level. So it's the local wards and local governments with support from academicians, practitioners, and NGOs and civil society actors. They do contribute to this process of collecting data. So a risk information is popping up, is being built up every day as we speak of all 750 local governments. So this is a national disaster management information platform managed by the NDRMA, but it's actually again operated by every local government. And so the beauty with this is not only hazards, but also again risk information, past events, past losses, disaggregated. And it's on an open source format. And so if you really click into that particular household, all the details are not available in the public. Say, for instance, the details on economics, on their finances and others, but especially when it comes to if there's a personal disability, what kind of disability is there? Whether it's an elderly person living with her grandchildren. And so those details are here. And so this is the beauty with this is again, the data, as rightly mentioned by Athena, again, the disaggregated data is not a problem as such, but it's kind of dispersed across multiple sources. And so this is where having all this kind of accumulated into a national repository where we could then use it for early warning systems, use it for risk financing, social protection, also for, again, risk reduction measures, again, designing, again, like the examples like shelters, where you would design it so that it's also caters for persons with disabilities. So this is an information platform that, again, it's coming up. It's not been done for all 750 local governments, but something of as around like 100 to 200 municipalities across the country. So this is how we're trying to again translate some of these strategic activities that's been outlined by the national strategy. And so this data is also being used by multiple academic institutions for research. More importantly, our current body of work has been used for this disaggregated data has been also being used for designing our early warning systems, but also social protection work. So this is how NDRMA, my previous institution that I used to head, has been able to kind of be a convener for such work, not being an implementer itself, but enabling local actors, local NGOs, INGOs, and academic researchers to be part of this national vision of, again, having gender, needs of persons with disabilities integrated into disaster risk management and climate change. So I'll stop here, and I'll be happy to answer any questions later on. Thanks.
Thank you. I really love how you've done the mapping and of vulnerability. I think that's quite fascinating, especially as you overlay sort of the different factors. And I was able to see how you're counting, the households, numbers of women. It's not easy to collect sex disaggregated data. So that was really interesting to see how you're doing it. Thank you very much. So now I'll turn to Dr. Akhter, who has been doing a lot of research in this area. So based on your research, which are the economic sectors that are most important for women's economic activity during the recovery period? And what are the main challenges in measurement and analysis to support gender responsive recovery programming? So over to you.
Thanks, Emily. I'll also stand up for better visibility. Hi, everyone. So thanks for this question. So my work is mostly in the rural areas of low and middle income countries, where the major economic sector is agriculture. So either partially or fully, households rely on agriculture for their livelihoods in rural areas of low and middle income countries. And as you know, agriculture is highly dependent on climate, And as the climatic disasters are increasing, agriculture's risk and vulnerability is also increasing. And in the agricultural sector, both men and women are heavily involved, contrary to conventional belief that women don't work in agriculture. Women just perform different roles, but both men and women are heavily involved. And women's role in agriculture is also increasing over time because of climatic disasters. Men are moving out of agriculture and going to non-agricultural sectors more and more. So the responsibility of managing farms are increasing. Women's responsibility is increasing over time. So when the agriculture sector is affected by a climatic hazard, it, of course, the first thing it does is destroys the crop, most of the standing crop, which is very important for food supply of the household who was growing that crop. And also it affects food supply for the community, because community also relies on that food to be supplied in the market. So as a result, food prices go up, and that also affect the food security, adversely affect the food security of the households who rely on buying food from the market. So the first thing it does is affects food supply, crop destruction. So it then leads to food insecurity because people don't have access to food, or food becomes very expensive. Another very not that highly discussed subsector of agriculture is the homestead-based agriculture, which is again led by women, which is like homestead-based vegetable production or orchard, which contributes quite substantially in the household dietary diversity, nutritional security, micronutrient sufficiency and supply for the household in a very inexpensive way. But when agriculture or climatic hazards affect agricultural sector, in addition to the major crop, loss of major crop, also these minor crops gets destroyed, and that has a quite substantial, significant adverse effect on household food and nutritional security. And also from theory and empirical evidence, what we learn is that it's the women and girls who suffer more when there is a lack of access to food. So that's the first thing. Second thing is destruction of livestock and poultry. So again, this is not something we discuss a lot. So in addition to crop destruction, also if there is a major massive cyclone or a flood that destroys or washes away livestock and poultry. So there are two effects of livestock and poultry destruction. One is that, again, this was an inexpensive way of protein supply for the households. And these are considered minor agricultural assets, which are owned by women. These are women's assets. And also the income generated from these assets were usually retained by women and used for their non-food agriculture, non-food expenses. So two things happen. One is that again, dietary diversity, nutritional insecurity, security is reduced, but also female poverty increases because women don't own a lot of assets in the rural areas, but some of the assets that they own, that also gets destroyed. And there's also not much discussion about these small assets because these are not considered a huge value. The third thing is that it reduces demand for agricultural labor. And you can say, well, it reduces demand for agricultural labor for both men and women, which is true. But when there's limited work, limited employment opportunities, women can't compete with men. So if there is like 5 agricultural jobs available, those 5 agricultural jobs usually captured by men because women are not, or employers prefer men because they are considered to have high productivity. There is also a spillover effect on other sectors. If women are running other businesses like a small kiosk selling non-agricultural small items, but because people don't have income and the economy is in a rural economy is a bad shape, so the demand for those other non-agricultural small items and items that are usually priced inelastic are usually lost. Okay, I don't have much time, so let me move to the next topic, which is in order to boost the rural economy, governments and international organizations usually launch programs like in Pakistan, there's a program, Cash for Work program, which has usually have a quota for women. And if there is no quota, as I said, it's very hard for women to compete in those kind of program. And as a result, men gets the sole beneficiaries of those public programs that are funded by public money. So if there is a quota, then women benefit from those programs. There's also another program after the 2010 Pakistan flood launched by UNDP, which was called the Targeted Asset Restoration Program, which distributed livestock and poultry to female for their income generation. And one of my studies show that this particular program run by UNDP increased women's time used for paid work, reduced women's time used for unpaid work, and most importantly, increased men's time used for unpaid work. So because women have income generation opportunities, it's also equalized or reduced the gender gap in unpaid work at the household level. The second question Zonibel asked me is about the challenges of measurement and analysis to support gender responsive recovery program. I think the first challenge we mentioned, several speakers mentioned about this absence of sex desegregated data. I think that's one of the major challenge. And the reason we don't have, or there's a lack of sex desegregated data is because there's limited awareness that disasters affect men and women differently. And the second reason is that, there's lack of capacity, lack of understanding what sex desegregated data means. I have seen this from my experience that even academics who work like applied economists don't understand what sex desegregated data means. So the common misunderstanding is that sex desegregated data means male versus female headed household, which is not the case. And also limited attention to non-economic loss and damage, such as unpaid work burden on women and violence against women. Although I have come to know that other existing natural disaster restoration program now started to think about, especially the program in Bangladesh has a very proactive initiative about violence or preventing violence against women after a natural disaster. And the most important challenge is the third last one, the no standardized simple tool for post-disaster data collection tool. And existing tools are either gender blind or they are very extensive. So the problem of using a very extensive tool in the aftermath of a disaster is that it's expensive to collect data. It takes a lot of time, enumerators training, and also like, because, and there's a lack of interest. If it takes a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of trouble to collect data, then people are not going to use that data collection tool. So what we need is not extensive data, but something very simple. So like Madhavi and we have been discussing for many years that can we come up with something like those standardized food security modules developed by the Food and Agriculture Organization or WFP, which is very simple standard question. So if you want to measure food insecurity now, you don't have to come up with your own modules or own set of questions. You can just take one of these standardized instruments and then use it. And those questions are quite, I should say, practical, because it doesn't require a lot of enumerators training, a lot of money and stuff. So I think that's another challenge, that we need to develop a tool that is practical and that can be implemented quite quickly and without spending much resource and training. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sonia. So before we go to the second round of questions from me to the panelists, I wanted to open it up for discussion in case people in the room have some questions, or we already have actually a couple of questions online. So I'll just go to the room first to see if you have any questions or quick comments or reflections from what you have heard so far. So anyone? Okay. Oh, yes, please.
Namaste. My name is Krishna from Nepal. I have questions with Sri Lanka and Bangladesh colleagues. So You talk about your institutional structure is very inclusive. So very good to hear that. And in our country also we have in terms of policy and in the documents it's inclusive. How it is, what is the percentage of inclusion? Like just 1 or 2% out of 10, 15 committees member, or just the 30 or 33%? So I just wanted to know that. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. As I have said, our lowest local government institution is, we call it Union Parishad. There are 3 fixed female members. Why they are? Because we want that they will encourage others to work. And if in the disaster management committees, you are right that not much high, but in our case, the empowerment of women have extended to a large extent. In those committees, there are representatives from different sectors, representatives from school teachers, then journalists, then business people, religious leaders, and many others. When I started my journey as civil servant 27 years back, we have very few female officers. And when I got the chance to work as deputy commissioner, we have 64 districts and we have hardly 4 or 5 female working at that post. Now, the present statistics is more than 15 are working as female working as deputy commissioners, and they're the head of district management committees. And in our primary school, 60% are women. They are working as teachers, and they also represent in various committees. So since the participation of women are increasing, not in government, in private sector also. If we go to Bangladesh, we'll find in almost non-government organization, high representation of women. So their representation in these committees are increasing day by day. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. In Sri Lankan structure, our lowest level is Gram Niladhari. We have nearly 14,200 GN division. Out of 14,200 GN division, 3,000 were vulnerable for all the hazards. And that also based on the impact of the maybe 7 to 8 hazards like floods, flash flood kind of. So all the local level structure, to ward level, inclusiveness is there because all the Grama Niladhari committee, we call subcommittees, village level committees, all the women-headed families were part of it. If you go to whatever the government or private sector, he brought it out very correctly. Sri Lanka inclusive women percentage is so high now because if you see the demographic pattern and the gender, male and female in Sri Lanka, female is number-wise more. So definitely they have a concern because they are part of it, because they are in the part of especially if you see the family, who take a decision, the father is doing the earning, but mother run the management kind of a thing. They are also, the inclusiveness is there in Sri Lanka, especially in all the government structure, because I do experience out of my agency, there are women headed. Institution also women headed. So, because since they are vulnerable, the especially decision-making process will be going to be easy because they know the gravity of that. So that's the inclusiveness, women inclusiveness or percentages, so vital, especially on managing any kind of disasters.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we have, I will give you the floor since you are from Sri Lanka as well. So maybe you'd like to also compliment or ask a different question. Different question. Okay. Okay, great. Do you want to, yeah, please ask your question and then we'll go to the online question.
Line if you want to.
No, please go ahead.
Yeah, very quickly, special data. Since I worked a little bit with special data, there are so many benefits, but also quite a bit of concerns in terms of, firstly, maintaining spatial data is very costly. Spatial data a database and making sure the layers are updated every so often. That's one question. What are the mechanisms? How are you going to finance it? How are you going to make sure it continues? Because I worked on a special database. We spent such a lot of money on that, on an urban special database, and then it's not being used. 5 years down the line, it's not being used. So just asking that question, it was, a particular ministry took it over and they obviously couldn't maintain it. The other thing is the layers, the gender layers that you're talking, gendered sort of layers, special layers that you can put in. It'll be interesting to know how exactly you do it, because some of the, I don't know, I'm just curious as to see how that can be, and if there's any, even from you or anyone else in the room, how do you do that in spatial data? How do you bring that out? Household data, yes, knowing those data. So that's the second aspect of it. Third one is about the availability and the use of this data by different people, because this sort of data becomes sensitive, and then the access to it. So they access the privacy, but also the allowing people to use the data. I'm sorry, I'm not turning this into a data session, but just those questions, because I find it extremely interesting, but also a very difficult area to kind of maintain and continue. Thanks.
Yeah, so I guess the issue of the maintenance, cost, use, sustainability, I guess in many ways is what you're asking as well.
Thank you, Ramana. Thank you for bringing this question. I think I was having a sideline discussion with Madhavi earlier, exactly discussing on these points. What I want to say is I've been a part of such kind of programs in the last 10 years for at least something amounting to $400 to $500 million wastage of money. GIS after GIS, layers after layers, not being used for decision making. These might have ended up in fancy kind of hard drives. No one uses it. So that's a world that we've kind of graduated from. So here is an alternative way of doing things. And this is how there's been, again, massive amount of, developments been done in the IT industry, and especially the youths and the newer generation people have been able to really kind of, really take this forward. What we've done is we've really learned from our past failures. I'll not even say lessons. And so failures of, designing this data architecture that are expensive, that's one-time project fad kind of thing. It dies off, and it's very centralized. It's done by a central agency. You hire GIS companies, and then it just dies out. It doesn't work. So here's an alternative approach. It's still a work in progress. It's going to evolve as we go along. So it's an open source data platform, A. B, it's an ecosystem of data. Again, for every municipality, they need to do it on their own. Some of these municipalities are really good. Like, they really evaluate, they put the data. They might not spend money for doing surveys itself. They might use the existing data to be populated into this environment. We as a national entity, we do help provide support for getting that. So it's an open source, use OSM, OpenStreet Mapping. So that's how we're not buying into any ArcGIS or any proprietary software. These are all open source license. So that's a way that you don't need to be on a trap for, getting these expensive softwares, hiring a GIS firm to manage it. Our focus here is more on enabling this environment. How do you train these local governments and with support from NGOs and INGOs? Everyone collects data, disaggregated data as Sonia mentioned it. And there's quite a bit of work been done on it. The idea is, how do you get into a common national repository? So that's easily accessible by everyone, for academic institutions, for early warning systems practitioners, or even for responders. So I think that's where our work is a little bit different compared to a lot of other countries. So what we're doing instead is we're actually working on selecting around 20 municipalities where we're focusing them on visualizing this, communicating this. We're trying to see how we've done, through a few of these initiatives whereby we've done boot camps. We do use this data, bring in youths and new generation people to really, use the data to to come up with storylines, to come up with videos, to come up with songs, musics, and dances, to communicate these data effectively. There's another body of work, again, jointly with ADB's work on Melamchi water supply project, early warning systems, but also a technical assistance on multi-hazard early warning systems and risk assessment. It's called Hindukush Himalaya Technical Assistance. We're trying to kind of use the data sets to visualize it, use it for early warning systems. So instead of, again, having a more generic, so it's more targeted. There's a lot of, again, quite an infestation of cell phones, quite an infestation of FM stations. So you could kind of literally use the power of, again, computing models, do a circle in certain particular municipalities. Use that, again, hazard information. Again, for continuously for 5-6 years, we've been, again, tracking some of those landslides, but the human dimension was missing. The disaggregated data was missing. We've been able to connect that. So it's basically through collective action and using the more advanced open sources, computational in these capacities, not doing it by ourselves and NDRMA alone. So having an ecosystem for organizations working together where UN, World Bank, ADB, and others really help us. I think that's going to help us. We massively inherited the 2015 earthquake reconstruction recovery data. It's almost close to 1 million data sets, data point. These are all kind of curated into that common space. So that's how, and so servers we inherited from the World Bank reconstruction project. We didn't let it die. And so we're just putting in firewalls, it's managed. So instead of, again, having 50 local governments managing all the data sets different, I think it would have been a massive cost. Now it's only done. The servers and those things are managed at a central level, but you are playing field at every municipality level. I think that's a model that we could still improve it further. But to me, it appears perhaps a good example to take it forward.
Great, thank you. So now I'm just going to go, we have actually quite a few questions online, but we're just gonna select one for now and see how we go. So Madhavi will ask.
There's a question here for Sonia. So the participant is interested to know whether existing national tools and processes for data collection are better to use, or should countries be using what international organizations develop and then tailor it for Asian economies? So what would be the right approach for implementing some of these tools?
Okay, thank you for this question. So I think is the local national economy driven approaches should be the best approach. So when there is no national capacity to develop the tools and implement the tools, only then maybe international standardized method should come into the picture, because there's no one-size-fits-all solution. Gender gap, gender discrimination, or gender differences are very context specific. And for this context and culture specific gender norms and gender differences, we need more localized and more nationalized approaches. That's why for this, even if it is a internationally developed tool that needs to be tested in the national setting first to test its effectiveness and to, refine or adjust it for the local context before using it. So it can be both bottom up or top down, but either way, it needs to be tested very carefully before implementing it. But I think the bottom up approach is more suitable, but if there is no, current capacity, then probably the international, more top down approach should be followed. Okay.
So there's actually one quite interesting question on sort of the special facilities that are sort of set up in emergency shelters, particularly for women. And so there's a question around the evacuation facilities. Are there rooms for couples or for families, lactation rooms? And if this is the case, how have you successfully sort of integrated this into your evacuation shelters? So if you'd like to take that question.
In Sri Lanka, we call safety centers. So there are special guidelines developed by as per the international standards how you are going to be manned safety center where the women and not for the families, basically the women separated and men separated for their separate areas for the especially feeding areas for the mothers, as well as the safety of the premises. So there are some guidelines. Even though those guidelines were there, especially due to some economic constraints, you don't have a proper kind of a solid safety centers. Most of the time in Sri Lanka, we do have safety centers like churches, schools, temples, kind of a thing. So we develop infrastructure facilities to upgrade those safety centers to reuse during this kind of a hazard situation, because these were well planned, identified. So the routes and everything was educated, aware to the community. If you have any kind of a situation, you can evacuate. These are the evacuation routes. So these are the, you can occupy these safety centers. So it was there, the guidelines is there, but there's a still gap. So we have to leverage some mechanism to fill the gap. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Actually, like Sri Lanka, we have Cyclone Shelter Construction, Maintenance and Management Policy 2011. So our almost 50% of the shelters, they are used as schools in normal time. And when disaster time, we use them for shelter. And as I have said, when we constructed those shelters 10 to 15 or 20 years back, there was no special facility for women and children. Now, as I have said, that there is one floor dedicated to the women. They have only women stay there and they can feed their babies. They have special washroom and other facilities. But so far, we have not been able to construct shelters that there will be separate room for couple or other family activities. You know, the building of infrastructure is a costly one. In Bangladesh, our one flood shelter, it cost in the range from taka 3 crore to our special type of flood shelters costing taka 8 crore. $1 is 120 taka approximately. So they stay there for some time. So we have not yet decided that how we will expand these shelters for a family room for every couple, because quite large number of people, they stay in a shelter. It may be 250, maybe 300, 400, 500, 600 like this. If possible, then we will think of it, but not now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for those two very detailed answers. And I think that sort of shows some of the challenges as well with using sort of structures, existing structures such as schools and churches and community centers, the upgrades that are needed, and also the reality when you're dealing with really large numbers of people in general. So to go back to the Sendai, framework, which is where we started, would like to hear from Director General Herath, looking at the 9 objectives of the Sendai GAP, which one of these do you think would be a priority focus area for Sri Lanka? And what do you think you would need to have in place to make progress on these sort of like, is there a need for resources or further capacity, or what systems may need to be put in place, looking at the 9 priorities of the Sendai framework, and which one do you think is most relevant or urgent for Sri Lanka to focus on?
Thank you. So as per the National Disaster Management Plan, Sri Lanka highly focused on key objective 7, implement gender responsive and inclusive end-to-end multi-hazard early warning system and anticipatory action. Because here, the vital is, because since women they are so vulnerable, so here most important thing is to get a lead time, because everything depends on the time and space. Because whatever the early warning you have to disseminate to after verify the whatever the agencies like Met Department, they used to give the rainfall, and irrigation department, riverine floods, and even National Building Research Organization, Earthslide. So these are so vital, the validation of data prior to give it to the, disseminate it to the especially these women-headed and vulnerable communities. Because otherwise it lead to disinformation and misinformation. So they will react in different way. So that is the most important thing. So we have last mile, last man, no one left behind kind of a concept to disseminate up to the community-based level and to the clusters which were led by the women. So we, under the World Bank also now, we are enhancing our early warning capacity as well as decision support system to disseminate this early warning to the real community. Because Sri Lanka, basically we depend forecasting kind of a thing. We have to enhance rather than forecasting, nowcasting kind of a thing, because very recently we experienced 2 hours, 412 millimeter rainfall, and it create a havoc and flash flood, and so many communities were victims, especially women. So this is the most important thing. So we have other thing is to approach kind of thing, because pre-positioning of whatever the dignitary keys, and mobilizing resources is so vital. If you have a early warning system to the most vulnerable community, they can pre-plan, pre-arrange, and pre-position their whatever their stuff. Especially we can mobilize like mobile health unit, because in Sri Lanka there are different subcultures. Most things are sensitive as per even the gender and the ethnicity base. So we have to act upon disseminating this early warning. You must much careful on this matter. And finally, if you spend 1 penny over the early warning, you can save 7 pennies during the response. And proactive action is so vital rather than reactive. If you are going to reactive, then you are going to be inactive. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Director General Rahman, in terms of Bangladesh, I guess similar question, but maybe if we could hear also from you, sort of the priority, but also what do you have in place, but more importantly, what you need to further sort of set in place in order to ensure that this priority is implemented?
Thank you. Actually, my answer is like my colleague from Sri Lanka. It is said a good beginning is half done. So if our preparedness is a quite significant, is quite well, then we can reduce our losses. Last year, when we experienced a flash flood in late July to early August, our loss was $1.2 billion. In Bangladesh, we are practicing early warning, but that is only river-based. So we have initiated pilot project with the funding of International Fund for Agricultural Development in 3 districts. Here, we are piloting inundation-based early warning, and that we can understand the impact. When it say that the water level will move half meter, that will affect our farmer, our fisheries. They will understand what does it mean, what they will do. So we want to expand this inundation-based early warning, and for that we need support. But we are piloting in only 3 districts, but we need to cover the whole Bangladesh. Nowadays, we are experiencing flash flood frequently. Last year, when the flood that I mentioned, it happened in 4 districts, and the water level rose so high that it never happened in last 50 years. And in these flash floods, as my colleague from Sri Lanka said, the lead time is very small. So if we do not get enough information, then our volunteers, our male and women who are residing in those areas, they cannot get information and they cannot move to a safer place. Another thing is anticipatory action. You see that in some of the development partners and our NGOs, their piloting is in around 20 districts. They have started a couple of years back. We have more 64 districts. But in this anticipatory action, a premium needs to be paid by the beneficiaries. In case of crop, we didn't get that success. But in case of WFP, they're piloting here for monsoon flood, the response is good. So under trial and error, we have to move forward. And for this anticipatory action, one report from WFP said, published last month probably, that we need 40 million US dollar, huge amount. So I think the priority, if we have good preparation, then we can reduce the loss of property, life, crops, livestock, and others. So we need help from this early warning dimension and as well as anticipatory action. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I think, similarly, for Mr. Pokhrel, really focusing on the Sendai Gap key objectives, what would you say from your experience of developing your own Nepal Sendai Gap? What did you prioritize and where do you see is the most need for either data or resources or capacity building in order to be able to implement that priority?
Thank you. So I think like this is where I could see this 9 set of priorities, objectives been identified by the Sendai Gap thing. Nepali version has 5 priorities. And so if you really look into it, our priorities are mostly centered around, again, having those disaggregated data systems that's easily available, accessible, but more importantly, how could we use it for making decisions? I think that's a key priority for us. And so that's going to continue. And in the absence of which, again, we'll not be able to kind of really do a targeted early warning system or social protection. So I think that's where it really hinges on the first priority. So for us, again, if you really look into the objectives, number 1 and number 2 are of utmost importance. But within, again, if I'd align with the Sendai Gap, 7, 8, and 9, all 3, because again, it has to do with early warning systems. Right now, if you had asked this question to the Secretary of Ministry of Finance in my country, he would have said straightway into objective number 8, because that's where most of the money has been spent on, almost $500 million for reconstructing quite a number of infrastructures, but 100,000 houses. And so that's a priority. That's also an opportunity for us. And so, but it will also allow us to kind of really subsequent to kind of use those information for making subsequent decisions as well. So 1, 2, 7, 8, and 9 is perhaps what I would vote for. But having said that, again, we've also made pretty substantial progress, especially on the governance side of things. 3 and 4, we've made quite good enhancements already. So that's why it's deprioritized. It's asking me again, which finger would you not like it to do and cut it off? Like, so it's not difficult. But one thing that I really, again, been learning from these engagements and with Mary and also during the APMC DRR, but also today's event is one area that I find pretty weak is again the reporting and the monitoring side of things. And so we've set aside governance structures to monitor the progress made by all these objectives, but still there's very limited capacities for monitoring them. The governance has already been identified, but really building that capacity along with other civil society actors to help them enable is really difficult. Finding finances, again, with the recent elections in the US and others, we've seen implications in really curtailing some of our funds that our NGOs have been getting it. So I see a little bit of a fear that the support to monitoring, supporting to translating some of these concepts is going to be a bit of a challenge for us going forward. So out of this, I see monitoring and reporting is also really important.
come to the forefront. So that was very, very helpful to kind of get a better idea of where your priorities are, but also what could be opportunities for, further focus. So with that, if Dr. Akhter, I'm going to ask you on two of the specific priority objectives, 1 and 2, on the need for better disaster information. So what are the things that are critical at the local level to make sure that we're collecting disaggregated data, that it's used, made available, and that we analyze it to identify post-disaster needs?
Thanks, Zonibel. So as I mentioned in my previous talk, that we talk about sex segregated data, and it's very important for policymaking. We need data-driven policy, but we don't talk much about that lack of capacity or capacity building for sex desegregated data collection, which is lacking. And that's because sex desegregated data collection has not been a common practice. So we need to, before we think about or focus on sex desegregated data collection, we also need to think about capacity building at the national level and at the local level about what sex desegregated data means, how to collect it, what data to collect. And also, as I mentioned in my talk before, that focus has, after disaster, is always damage or infrastructure damage, not so much about losses or both economic and non-economic losses. Most importantly, non-economic losses are ignored. So it's when we are doing this data collection, thinking about sex desegregated data collection, we also need to think about what type of damage and losses domains we are covering. And damage and losses also occur in different points in time. Some occurs right after the natural disaster, some occurs maybe 1 month down the line, some 6 months down the line, some 1 year down the line. So at different point in time, different types of losses and damages surface. So we need to be able to capture this and have the capacity to capture this. And for that, I think both academics as well as policymakers and practitioners have role. And we, as Madhavi and I, have been working on designing a tool that is practical, that can be used by policymakers. We should continue these types of effort in collaboration with the policymakers. The second thing is key objective 2, which is using gender analysis in policymaking. So it's not just the data collection, but we also need to be able to use it, because I hear this question from policymakers often that, okay, we have collected tons and tons of sex desegregated data, but now what? How do we move from here to actually making policy? So this, I guess, sex desegregated data and the analysis can give us very crucial information about a particular area. As I mentioned, that there is gender gaps vary across context and location. So if we don't collect location-specific data, we wouldn't know what the problem is in that specific area. If just sex desegregated data shows that there is a spike of gender-based violence after a natural disaster, then we need to use policy making, like designing program in the aftermath of a natural disaster. That includes like mental health support for men, instead of vilifying men and policing. Gender-based violence alone is probably not going to solve the problem, but why gender-based violence is spike in the aftermath of a natural disaster? Probably stress, probably loss of asset, loss of properties, and financial lack of financial resources that causes all this hike in gender-based violence. If we can include a mental health support for both men and women in the aftermath of a natural disaster, which helps them cope psychologically with the damages and losses that they have incurred, probably that might help the situation. And the third thing that I have come up when I was listening to the policymakers talk about their programs, and I was pleasantly surprised about all the very interesting and very useful programs that they already have in their overall disaster risk management programs. And I think what we need is to do the evaluations of the policy and need partnership with academics, so that So this is my open invitation to all policymakers and practitioners who are sitting there, that please open your doors for us so that we can come and see what kind of policies you are using, and we can evaluate those policies. So for example, the Director General of Bangladesh Disaster Risk Reduction mentioned that there is a gender-based violence program, which I was really surprised to hear that program is there, but I am interested to know, is it effective? How well the program is running. So we can actually design an evaluation study to assess how good the program is, and if there is a loophole, or opportunities, rooms to improve the program to make it more effective, we can help you do it. So please partner with us in the designing, testing, and evaluating your programs so that we can design better policies. So it's not just about sex desegregated data collection, but also when you have a program, we can then look into the program and see. And that evaluation has to be done independently by third parties like us, who don't have any stake in the outcome of that evaluation. So please do partner with us, give us your data, and also design program with us in the outset, design pilot programs with us. And yeah, so I think that will really improve the overall disaster risk reduction and its gender inclusiveness. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Akhtar. As you were speaking about sort of the losses that we might not always count, I was reflecting on my first development experience was in Colombia in the aftermath of a very large disaster where a town of 35,000 people was virtually wiped out due to there was a volcano and a landslide, and basically about 30,000 people died. And so I worked in a community that was organized by Save the Children of displaced people from this disaster. And the social capital that is lost, that is something that perhaps we don't talk about enough, particularly when there's mass displacement like this. But for women, this is very critical, the social networks, the social capital. And I wonder sort of whether we also count it as sort of one of the losses in terms of disasters. But it would be, interesting also to consider, because for the women that I worked with, this was a major issue. They lost their friends, they lost their family members, they lost their neighbors and people that they counted on for, childcare, or for borrowing money when there was a emergency in their home. So I was just thinking about that as you were talking about the things that we don't count as losses. So we unfortunately have run out of time, but just really wanted to thank all of our speakers today for sharing with us their experiences in national disaster risk management agencies. And as Dr. Akhtar pointed out, I think that your presentations have really shown us how much work is happening in your countries, and how broad it has been, and very diverse in bringing in sort of the experiences of women, everything from looking at the collection of data, inclusion, looking at sort of particular issues of the disabled, people living with disabilities, as well as the issue that is also, of course, very central to women, unfortunately, during disasters, which is protection issues and related to gender-based violence. So thank you very much to all of you. And I think we are now going to a break. Okay. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Zonibel, and thank you to our panelists. It's really been a very fascinating session. We should break for lunch, and we'll meet here again at 1:30 p.m. I'm sure Diane had some reminders. That's it. It's okay? Yeah. Okay, so we get a lunch break and please be back on time. Okay. Lunch will be right here, thanks to the excellent facilities and of ISAS again.